About a week out from the NFL draft, what do we actually know about the Raiders' draft plans? Well, if you've been paying attention, the clues have been there. So we're going to dive into them today. Raider Nation, what's good? Jesse Merrick here. Welcome into another episode of the Silver and Black Sports Network podcast presented by PrizePicks. Now, today's show isn't just another mock draft. Plenty of those are out there, and we're going to do one final one next week leading up to the draft. Instead, today's show is all about putting together the information we've gathered from the Combine, the Raiders' pre-draft visits, free agency, and what Spytek and Kubiak have actually told us over the last few months. And after we piece it all together, I'll go round by round and explain to you how I think the Raiders will actually play the board along the way. But before we get there, you guys know how we do it. It's time for our question of the day before we get the show rolling here, okay? And today, I want to know what your biggest takeaway has been from the offseason as far as it pertains to the draft. What clues did you actually pick up from the Raiders' draft plans about what they did over the offseason? Let me know in the comments. Be the GM. Sound off in there and let me know what you think they're going to do on draft day. And if you're new here, welcome. Join the rest of Raider Nation who's already smashed those like and subscribe buttons and gotten in on the party. And check us out online as well at silverandblacksportsnetwork.com to subscribe to our free Raiders newsletter, which drops every Friday morning with all the latest Raiders news, insights, and analysis. And so with all that out of the way and the draft right around the corner, it is now time to connect the dots, read the clues, and figure out what the Raiders' draft strategy could really be. So let's get it rolling. All right, look, guys, let's keep it real. We don't have to talk about Fernando Mendoza. We know what's happening there. Spytek mentioned they fielded calls, but we know what's going down. We'll talk plenty about Mendoza next week, so we'll move on instead to the guys who were in front of him. As far as the offensive line goes, we all know about this staff's history turning O-lines around. We've talked a ton about that. We know what Klint said about having stability at both tackle spots with Colton Miller and DJ Glaze, who this staff clearly thinks has more to offer and honestly looked like he was trending in the right direction before last season as well. Then there's Charles Grant, who's got all the tools but is very much a developmental project, so he still needs some more time. But Spytek made it clear when he spoke this week that he loves drafting O-linemen.
In terms of the draft this year, I'm happy that we added the guys we did, but I've never been anywhere where you don't feel like you've got too many offensive linemen. They're just such a hard position to acquire, and whether it's in the draft, it's almost impossible in free agency. It feels like, especially at certain positions, and just because we've added certain guys through free agency doesn't mean that we won't be looking for offensive linemen too. I'm on record as saying they're sexy as hell, and I stand by that.
Now, from that, two major things stuck out to me there, okay, guys? One is that he's talking about tackles in particular when he mentions how hard it is to acquire those guys in free agency. Good young tackles don't just hit the open market. You're not finding the Tyler Linderbaum of tackles in free agency looking for their second deal. Teams typically just don't let those guys walk out the door. That's why I think if an elite guy slides to them at tackle there at 36, they're going to take one of them because they're just so hard to find. Also, he said just because they added certain guys in free agency, it doesn't mean that they won't be looking for O-linemen. That, to me, speaks to guard. They obviously brought in Spencer Burford. And look, the O-line was bad. They think they can get more out of it, but I'd imagine we see them draft a guard and a tackle in the draft at some point here. Just depends where and kind of how that works out. Obviously, they're going to have more on the O-line total in this room, and we'll be diving deeper into the O-line here in a few, but we're going to bounce around a bit here. So let's move to the defensive side for now. They haven't hid from the fact that they need a safety. Klint mentioned it. John danced around it by saying they've only got 3 guys on the roster, so clearly they have to address it, and lucky for them, it's a very deep safety class. The need is really clear. They have to find a center fielder. I think that, to me, is priority number 1 in that safety room. They talked to Genesis Smith at the Combine. He very much is that center fielder, deep safety type of guy. The worry with him is the tackling. Bud Clark is the guy that I've pounded the table for on the pod. I think he's just really positionally versatile, specifically from a coverage standpoint. He can play up high, he can come down to the slot, all that stuff. We talked to Dalton about the safety group as a whole and actually posted that portion as its own standalone segment. So do go check that out on our YouTube channel here if you want more on the safeties as a whole and Dalton's take on them. He offers a really good read on that group. But we'll touch more on Kamari Ramsey in a sec, who they brought in for a 30 visit. Overall, though, don't be surprised that we see them add maybe 2 safeties in the draft, or one of those comes in the draft, and then right after the draft with the undrafted free agent, it is deep enough, and the need is most definitely there. But let's go talk about Ramsey again here, okay? As far as he goes, he's likely going to be there in the third, and he's that versatile chess piece type of safety that honestly we see that's kind of in vogue right now around the league. To me, safety in the third just feels like the move for them, the way the board could likely stack up. And how can you not like him? He's got the ball skills, the intelligence is easy to see when you turn on the tape, and he can play both deep safety and slot corner as well. I know they traded for Taron Johnson, but with those injury issues that he had in recent years here, Cody Alexander, that is, from Match Quarters, you guys have heard him plenty of times on the show, he actually thinks that he might be rotated a bit more, or maybe will be on a bit of a snap count, just to really maximize his availability and what he can do. So with that kind of in mind, who better to fill in and learn from him than Ramsey? I think that's an interesting aspect to maybe pair both of those guys together, and then Taron Johnson can get Ramsey ready for the future as well. Hey guys, we'll get back to the show in a sec, but real quick, I wanted to talk to you about our presenting sponsor, our homies over at PrizePicks, okay? They're America's #1 sports picks app, and they're running a promo for new users right now. So go download the app and use the code HMA to play $5 and get $50 in lineups. That's a hell of a deal. For more info, check out the link in the description of today's video. And also, look for me on there as well. You can actually follow my picks, because during the football season, I'll be setting lineups each and every week, giving you my take on which players I think are going to pop off and which ones I think won't. But do keep in mind that you should only play if you can do so responsibly, and if you have the means to do it as well. You got to make sure that you're gambling responsibly, guys. In the meantime, though, let's dive back into today's show. All right, let's jump back on offense real quick here. I think tackle is definitely in play at 36 if a guy like Max Ihanachor, yes, I finally learned how to say his name. It's Max Ihanachor, happens to be there at 36. I think it's a no-doubter. You go and run that card in, because that guy is one of the more explosive tackles in this draft, possibly the most explosive tackle, a former basketball player, still young in the position, has all the traits you could possibly need. Imagine Rick Dennison working with him. Again, though, I don't know if he makes it past the Pats. I've talked about it many times on the podcast. We saw how present Mike Vrabel was working with him there at his pro day. I'd imagine it doesn't make it there. But if Caleb Lomu is there too, I think there could be a discussion. It just depends like who else is available there at that time. Because look, Caleb moves so well. Power is the big issue for him in his game. But honestly, I think there's probably going to be better value there at either receiver or D tackle instead of taking Lomu. So to me, it's either max or bust, and I don't think he'll actually be there. Obviously, maybe a Blake Miller slides or some of the other top tackles do, but again, tackle is such a premium position. I'd imagine those guys are mostly going to be gone. In every mock draft I've done as of late to prepare for our final mock draft next week, Max and a lot of those tackles aren't there. It just seems like Lomu is the only guy who does still last there. And again, love the athleticism, and he would fit totally into the scheme. I just think they're better suited using that pick on something else. Possibly like a guy like an Emmanuel Pregnon, if he happens to be there. He was in a recent mock draft for me, and I was sitting there racking my brain thinking like, gosh, I don't know how I could pass up a guy like him for the Raiders. I mean, look, he is pretty much the guy that everyone says is the best run blocker in this draft. I would imagine that they won't pass him up. We all know that Kubiak wants to run the football, and obviously with how bad that offensive line was, so I don't think that Pregnon would make it past them, honestly, if he happens to fall there. Now, if the tackles are gone, I think it's a matter, honestly, of wide receiver or D-line. I bet you that's how it would really stack up in terms of the value at the top of the second if those guys are indeed gone. And Spy didn't talk about either of those spots at his press conference. I wasn't able to be there. I did have a prior commitment, but I will be down there at Raiders HQ for the draft, so I'll be able to get in on the mix with asking some questions and stuff after these guys are drafted. But Kubiak has talked a lot about how great it is to have a true X-type receiver. To be fair, he talked about a Megatron type of guy who wouldn't want to have that, and he said if you don't have it, you work with what you got, blah, 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 all that stuff. But I've got a feeling that it will come down to a Denzel Boston who does fit that X type of role very well. But honestly, at the top of the second, based off of all the mock drafts I've done in recent weeks behind the scenes here, it looks like it's going to be Denzel Boston versus Christian Miller at 36. If they both do happen to be there, again, like I said, a lot of the times they have both been there. And that's a real tough decision. And honestly, I have waffled a million times on which way to go there with both of those guys available. But I lean Miller just because I think he's super undervalued and honestly can do anything they would ask of him on the D-line. And to me, he's a dude who's better than a lot of D linemen who would have been drafted in the first over the last couple years as well. And again, you can throw him in the middle of your defensive line and not have to worry about it. Right after the sunset, your D line is in a really good spot with Max, and then obviously the rotation of Quiddy and obviously I know they're going to be 3-4 whatever, but in more of the 4 down fronts, obviously because we won't see him in that 3-4 a ton. But again, just adding that guy to that D line, I don't see how you could pass that up if he happens to be there, even with the Denzel Boston there. But I reserve the right to waffle on that again before the draft starts. We'll see what happens in the mock draft. But positionally, now let's stick overall with the D line. We talked about it with Cody Alexander a ton. I don't think they're going to draft the pure nose tackle. I know they talked to Lee Hunter at the combine, but other than that, honestly, it's been a bunch of versatile kind of tweener type of guys who can move along the D line and then play some true nose, that zero tech when you do need them to. And again, since they'll likely only be in that base 3-4, like 18 to 30% of the time, I think that's totally fine. You just need a guy who can, again, feel good about being thrown into that zero tech role 18 to 30% of the time. And they do also have JJ Pegues. We cannot forget about him. So honestly, for you guys at home, like, don't expect to see a true nose tackle on the first 2 days of the draft, unless for whatever reason they really, really, really happen to like Dominique Orange, who's a guy that I like too. And honestly, he is more than just your true nose tackle, I think, honestly, too. And hearing more people that break him down, I think he's got more to offer than that. So he can be a bit more of a versatile piece than just that true nose, but he does lean more of that zero tech type of guy. Also of note, though, they did bring in Caleb Banks from Florida for a 30 visit. Okay, he's got injury issues, and he's a big man who broke his foot twice. That scares the hell out of me and a lot of other folks out there. But as Chris Sims recently noted, Banks has some Chris Jones-ish type of stuff in him. When you got a guy like that, how can you look past him? That 30 visit obviously was to get some good medical info on him before the draft. And if he does indeed slide, which it looks like he will, out of the first round, I don't know that he's going to make it that far. But if he does, or if he gets late in the first, we'll get a real quick lesson on how the Raiders do feel about him and that foot and word that they got from bringing him back here on that 30 visit. He's going to be a fascinating one to watch on draft night of where he slides, because honestly, I've had some people say he is the most talented defensive lineman in this draft. Defensive tackle, that is. We'll see where he goes. But again, another guy, positionally versatile. You can move him all along the offensive or all along the defensive line. Total game changer. But also, too, as a late round pick, keep an eye on Chris McClellan, okay, on day 3. He was a really interesting one that they brought in on a 30 visit, okay? He's 6'4" and over 320 pounds, but has the versatility to play zero tech all the way to 5 tech as well. Again, versatile pieces like that are valuable, especially with a guy like Robin Leonard, who is a D-line coach, wants to be versatile, wants to run a lot of stunts, wants to move these guys all over the place. If they don't go D-line early, honestly, I wouldn't be shocked to see them try and maybe reach a bit to get McClellan. I've heard a lot of people talking on different podcasts. I've read up on him more. I've watched a bit of him. He just seems like he's a guy that could be one of those guys wherever he ends up, people are like, damn, how did he last as long as he did? So just keep an eye on McClellan. He's an interesting piece at some point. Like I said, I bet you the Raiders maybe reach for him. Maybe we'd be like, oh, didn't have him going this early, but the Raiders land him and ends up being a really solid player for them and can fill, again, a lot of different roles along your defensive line and just gives you so much of that versatility with the Raiders and how they want to be multiple. We've heard them talk about the 3-4 base and the fact that they're not going to live in that. Klint has talked about the fact that they're going to be in 4 down a lot. They're going to be throwing some 5 down looks there as well. So a guy like him would be so valuable. Now, let's keep it moving to obviously my favorite position, receiver. It's real tricky. And this is where I really want to start to dive into the 30 visits a bit more. We'll be sprinkling them in here and there, and we kind of have already a little bit. But look, they've talked to a mix of guys, different body types, different types of players. So it's hard to get a full read on them. But again, look at the roster. Look at what's missing, okay? The need for a true X is easy to see. And just looking at their 30 visits, they talked to 5 guys who fit that big boundary X type of receiver role in Denzel Boston, Chris Bell, Caleb Douglas, Ted Hurst, and Anthony Smith, okay? Do your deep dives on all of those guys. But overall, this is a deep draft for the X receivers. So they've really got an opportunity, honestly, to play the board here in terms of adding at that position. I think they're going to be able to just be like, hey, here's our ranking of X receivers. If for whatever reason these guys are just better than the next BPA, best player available at any point that we're picking in the draft, and we haven't already addressed that, boom, then we go there. So I like the way that they're slotting up to be able to find themselves an X. I do not see them getting out of this draft without adding a true difference maker at the X position. Where that'll be, who knows? But again, Ted Hurst, an interesting guy to keep an eye on. Top of the second, and we noted Denzel Boston. We talked about him a lot in recent weeks with a lot of folks, so it's going to be fascinating to see who they do end up bringing into the fold there at that spot. I can't wait to see how it plays out for him. But Jeremy Bernard, he is also another very interesting guy as well. Also got Vegas ties too, which is really cool. But he's more of that Deebo Samuel running back type of build guy. And when you read about him, though, even though we talk about the Deebo comp and everything, you kind of get like Jackson Smith and Jigba vibes. And I watched some Bama games. I used to work in Alabama. I covered them, when Nick Saban was coaching there. It was a lot of fun. I got to cover 2 national championships while I was out there. So I still watch a lot of Bama football. So I've seen Jeremy plenty when he transferred there. I watched him when he was at Washington as well, again, just because of the Vegas tie-in from when I was at NBC here. And honestly, like I said, like he could just be that like poor man's Jackson Smith and Jigba, where too, like all of a sudden you're looking at it and you're like, man, this guy just all of a sudden popped off, and why didn't he go earlier than he did? Like, just seems like that guy that like could be someone that Klint Kubiak just gets a ton out of. Now, he is like a round 2 candidate if they trade back, or maybe he slides to the 3rd. It's going to be interesting to see where Jeremy Bernard goes. And honestly, like, let's keep it real too. As I'm throwing around a lot of these like grades of where these guys are going to end up going, like, nobody really knows at this time of year. It's so tough because there's like so many inputs where like you look at guys and you're like, okay, it tells me this is what this guy is, or you start reading up from other people that do this for a living and the different evaluators. You listen to former players and people that are now more on the scouting side of things, like all of that. It's so hard to get a read on where these guys are actually going to go. That's why the draft is so fascinating, because things change so much. But Jeremy Bernard is one of those dudes I'm really going to be watching to see where he goes. And speaking of Vegas ties, they did also talk to Zachariah Branch. We know about the history with him and Cliff as well. And they talked to Zachariah twice now, possibly a bit more with other different Zooms and things like that. But definitely at the combine. And then they brought Zachariah home here for a 30 visit as well. This kid is like a Jalen Waddle type of guy. Also crazy strong too. I don't know if you guys knew that. I mean, this guy put up 20 reps of 225 on the bench press. That's insane for a dude at his size. And he's been living that like professional football player life for a very long time. His family has had him locked in. Go listen to any interviews where he talks about it. Like, he's not shy about saying how different he is, and the fact that he was doing like cryotherapy when he was in like elementary and middle school. The kid is a beast. Kid is all about ball. He's a worker. Again, the Vegas tie-in, the Cliff tie-in, all that different stuff. But like I noted, kind of more that Jalen Waddle type. And I'll get to why that's interesting in a second here. But if they add him or a guy like a Casey Concepcion, we talked about him a bit too with Dalton Wasserman. The more I read about KC, the more I actually watch him with my eyes, the less I love him. I could be wrong. I know some of you guys out there love him big time and think he's going to be this game changer of a player. The speed just doesn't jump off to me. And for a guy like him and what his game is, like, I need to see more in that regard. And I just don't see it when I watch the tape. But honestly, I think overall, if they do end up getting one of those guys that fits that kind of mold, I think what we're looking at in the receiver room, when you go and look around more of what they have there, they have a lot of speed. We would see probably more of kind of what the Dolphins did when Mike McDaniel was out there. That's obviously similar scheme family. We'd be seeing a lot of those like cheap motions, a lot of the jet sweeps. We know Kubiak loves his motions. With all that speed, if they just added an influx of speed and didn't go the route of adding an X, or maybe they add an X and still bring in one of those speed guys, like, then you're looking at this receiver room thinking like, holy shit, like they've got a lot of different things to be able to do with guys that can move all over the place. So I'm curious to see how they end up, actually addressing receiver in this one. And overall, guys, like I know we've bounced around a bit, so bear with me here as we do this because this is how my brain works sometimes. But here's my take on the 30 visits as a whole, which if you want more info on all the guys that they did actually talk to, just Google Raiders 30 visits and search the guys that you're interested in. Because again, there's a lot of them. You can do a deep dive all day digging into each and every one of them. And honestly, we don't have enough time on this podcast. Even though I can go as long as I want, it'd be like an hour and a half long podcast. We really did the deep dive on each and every one of these guys and all the dudes that they talked to. We'll be doing more of that, obviously, after guys are taken. But again, there are just too many of them to break down on this one. And honestly, I think that those 30 visits, though, like it's important to note how important those are. Last year alone, 4 of the Raiders' 11 draft picks actually came to Vegas on 30 visits. So it's very likely that whoever the guys are that came here to Vegas will ultimately end up in silver and black. It's always interesting to see who that ends up being after the fact. But here's how I think they're trying to play the board in each round based off of, again, everything we've seen from the offseason, and also, too, particularly, though, just looking at these 30 visits and also pairing that with kind of what they did at the combine as well, okay? In the first round, obviously, it's quarterback. It's going to be Mendoza. Like, they don't have to spend a lot of time there. Maybe they trade back up. We'll kind of see. Again, like in the second, that's where I don't rule them out moving up or down, to be completely honest. Caden McDonald is a no doubt first rounder to me. So if he slides a bit, I could see them jumping back up for him. Again, they brought him out for a 30 visit. He stuck out to me in that group of those guys where I was like, why are they talking to him? Because he's very likely not going to slide. A lot of talent evaluators think that he is a top 15 talent. So I'm very curious to see where he goes. But if he happens to last towards the back half of the draft, maybe Spy and company use some of that draft capital that they've got to move up and go and get him. He is a total game changer. We talked with Dalton a lot about him. Go back and watch our podcast that we did earlier this week to kind of dive into him a bit more. But long story short, best run defender in the draft. Set it and forget it type of guy, but again, has more, I think, than people realize as a total package type of player. If they stay at the top of the second, again, we've talked about this a ton, likely receiver or defensive tackle in the second. My gut says Christian Miller over a Denzel Boston, and then they attack X receiver later on. We'll kind of see how that plays out. Again, I wouldn't be mad if they go either way. My gut just again says this is going to be a group that wants to build from the trenches, the inside out. And again, the fact that it's such a deep draft with those X receivers and the number of guys that they brought in, I think they'd be okay with trying to wait and target one of those guys later on. In the third, I bet this is when we see them go for a safety, okay? Kamari Ramsey or Genesis Smith, or they try and get an X receiver here with guys like Chris Bell or Ted Hurst, okay? But I think the fourth is the time to hit the DBs. If they don't land Ramsey in the third, maybe you grab a safety like a Bud Clark here, then address corner as well. San Diego State's Chris Johnson, he has been a hot name. He came in for a visit. I don't know if he lasts this long to the fourth, but he's got the athleticism, he's got the length and technique and press man to stand out, even though I think we do see a lot of zone from the Raiders this year. Again, Cody Alexander has talked about it. He thinks it's still going to be very zone heavy, not the Pete Carroll zone like we saw in the influence there, but probably still more zone like we saw from Patrick Graham over the years before Klint came into town. But with that in mind, though, they also talked to Dalen Everett, who is also, again, more of a man-to-man corner out of Georgia as well. So maybe we're wrong there and they'll man up more. After talking to Eric Stokes, he talked about Darian Porter, and he feels that Darian should be more of that man-to-man type of guy as well. If they really like him, maybe they shift more towards that. But also the range that these guys do possess, you love that as a zone corner too, because again, getting the passing windows, things like that. But who knows? Again, we'll kind of see how that all transpires with Rob Leonard calling the shots now and which way he wants to lean. Maybe he leans more towards the Flores side of things or whatever. It's going to be so interesting to watch what they do coverage wise, blitz wise, so many things on there. But deeper into day three, like the fifth round on, okay, this is what we're talking about here. They likely find their RB2. Kalen Black from Indiana was in town this week. He's a real physical runner who held up well in pass pro as well. Obviously, Mendoza does trust him. He's another contact balance runner like Genty is as well, but not the best receiver. Granted, if you're looking at receiving situations, why not throw Genty out there, the pure like game breaker type of guy? But again, they're going to add another running back. We didn't see that happen in free agency, so the draft feels like the place to go. Mendoza would have a great read on him too. So I'm curious to see how that all pans out too. But he was a busy guy. He jumped around a lot too. So other teams are going to be interested in him. I'm just real curious to see where they end up taking a running back in this draft for their RB2. Also, some depth at linebacker probably comes here as well on day three, in that 5 through 7 range there. Jack Dingle from Cincy was in town. His relative athletic score, this is crazy, was off the charts. He posted a 9.81. So this late with those traits, that to me screams special teamer in so many ways, especially out of a linebacker and early on in your career there. And look, you always do want to take edge rushers in each and every draft. We talked about that with Cody as well. And I think we see them do that on day 3, okay? I don't think they're going to invest a super high pick or even a day 1 or day 2 pick on edge unless for some reason, again, some dude that they just cannot pass up falls to them. But an interesting name who was in town for a 30 visit is Mitchell Melton from Virginia, okay? And he's intriguing. He's got the ideal length for an edge rusher and his positional versatility as well when they're in 4 down to play end with his hand in the dirt there, and then he can also stand up as an outside linebacker as well when they're in base too. Now, he does need to get stronger, but he's got good pass rush upside as well. So just another guy to keep an eye on. That's where I pull from these 30 visits. And I concentrate a bit more on like the later round guys where I'm like, man, this is really intriguing to see who they may be targeting. You get a read on those guys and just names to keep an eye on day 3 because that is so hard because these draft boards that they have are so long. So you never really know where they're going to be going with that. But just he's one of those guys, kid out of Missouri as well, McClellan. So I'm just so fascinated to see how day 3 works out for the Raiders and the depth that goes there. Can they hit on a guy like a Max Crosby, 4th round picks? I mean, that is massive. Do they use some of those to move up in the draft? We'll kind of wait and see, obviously, how that pans out. But overall, I like how things are panning out for the Raiders. But that's just kind of my take on how the draft shakes up with the things that we've learned from them over the last couple weeks and everything. And now I will be taking all of that and putting it into a mock draft that we'll be doing next Tuesday. Now, we did one live mock draft, gosh, at this point, maybe like a month ago or however long ago it was. It was a lot of fun. We did that one live. I'm probably going to pre-record this one just because I want to work on some stuff behind the scenes. I had some issues when I tried to do it live in terms of sharing the screen and all that. So I might do this one behind the scenes to be able to make sure I'm sharing the screen and doing all that different things and kind of walk you guys through my take on it. Also, too, another reason why I don't want to do it live, I love doing those live shows with you guys, but I got swayed by you guys a little bit while we were doing it live with some of the picks. And I want to approach this more, not from what I think or even what you guys think from a fan's perspective. I want to try and put myself in the mind of Klint Kubiak and also John Spytek in that war room and be able to approach it from what I think they're going to do. So that's another reason why I think I want to do this one without the live audience and everything like that. Even though I love the interaction with you guys, I just want to be able to kind of think about it through the lens of what those guys might do a bit more and give you guys more of a mock draft that I think is more tailor-made for what probably happens with the Raiders rather than like any other outside inputs and stuff like that. So I'm curious to see how it works out. I've done a couple of them behind the scenes, just trying to get myself prepared of like how it all pans out, and those ones are fun. So that's going to be an interesting one. Like I said, we'll be dropping that on Tuesday, very likely at 10 a.m. If anything changes, I'll let you guys know if we're going to do it live. But in the meantime, that'll be the next time we see you guys on the pod. I hope you enjoyed the show today. I tried to connect a lot of the dots and dive into those 30 visits and explain just how I think the draft falls to them. So let me know in the comments what you guys thought about today's show. You guys have been so complimentary, obviously, over the years. We haven't done one of these solo shows in quite a while. I've been bringing a ton of guests on. I figured today would be a good time for me to really kind of let you know what I took away from the things that we saw. So anyway, guys, as always, thank you for watching, listening, and subscribing, and we will catch you guys next time on the next episode of the Silver and Black Sports Network podcast. Take it easy.